Hi everybody in Disruptivo. We are here today with David Grayson. He is a champion for social entrepreneurship. We're here in the middle of the ELAC. It's an event organized by Ashoka, the Encounter for Agents of Change. It's a very interesting event, and we have the huge opportunity to talk to David, who is an author, who is a professor, and who, like I said, just dedicates himself to promoting social entrepreneurship. So, David, thank you so much for the time.
My pleasure.
Awesome. Why don't we start from the beginning? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? What is it that you do? Then we can pass to your story, which is pretty cool. But what is it that you're doing right now?
So right now I'm a professor of corporate responsibility in the Cranfield School of Management in the UK, which is a leading global business school. And I've been doing that for about 8.5 years. I was headhunted from outside academia. I'm not an academic by background, to set up a new centre for corporate responsibility at Cranfield.
Awesome. You're also an author of several books. Why don't we'll go into your latest book in the end, obviously, but why don't you tell us a little bit about what is it that you've been writing about?
So my first book, written with a good friend and colleague, Adrian Hodges, was in 2001, and we called it Everybody's Business, Managing Risks and Opportunities in Today's Global Society.
Okay.
And we tried then, it was a very unusual book because it had lots of photographs, and it was produced with the Financial Times, and we had a foreword from Prince Charles, and we looked at the big global forces of change, revolutions of markets and technology and of demographics and development and of values, and we looked at the consequences for business in terms of what we call some emergent management issues, the environment and diversity and human rights, and issues to do with local communities, and issues to do also with questions of the whole way in which business interacted with society. That was the first one. And then we followed it up 3 years later with a book called Corporate Social Opportunity.
Awesome.
The idea that businesses shouldn't just manage down their negative social and environmental and economic impacts, but actually also look for the positive social and environmental and economic impacts that they can have, and how can they turn that into new business products and services, new routes to market, new business models. And that really was trying to emphasize that if businesses were going to take their responsibilities to wider society more seriously, it had ultimately to be to the benefit of business as well.
I love that, and actually we just heard you speak in the opening of ELAC, and you were saying a couple of very interesting concepts towards that idea that if, for example, if businesses actually do, and if big companies do care about creating impact, for example, one of the things they have to do is they have to bring the same kind of talent, to these soft, so-called soft areas of business like human rights and sustainability, exactly, and obviously social impact. They have to bring the same kind of talent that they bring to corporate finance and marketing, and I think that's a very, very interesting idea.
It is. The only thing I would build on that is it has to be the same talent. In other words, you shouldn't say, well, we will have equivalent talent over there doing this kind of good work.
So they have to be the same people.
Same people, actually making this integral to the way they run their business. So people in purchasing and supply incorporating environmental impacts and social impacts in their purchasing decisions through their supply chain. So people in marketing thinking about how do we market this product or service in a socially responsible way? How do we try and engage our consumers to want to consume sustainably? Or how do we calculate the business financial benefit from taking a more responsible business position as part of our finance team?
Because that way, then you're not saying, like social responsibility or sustainability are, parallel parts of the business or are things that are running as sides,
They are the business.
They are incorporated in the business, and every decision you take has that intrinsical, has that incorporated in its decision. I love that.
Exactly.
I love that idea.
And in essence, what we said back in 2004 originally is that rather than being a bolt-on to business operations, how you manage your social and environmental and economic impacts should be built in to the business purpose and strategy.
Okay.
If you look at Unilever today, for example, it's a great example of a company which has made sustainability their core business strategy.
Okay, awesome. I mean, we in Disruptivo, we talk about that. We talk about businesses that try to change the way we're doing business, that are trying to, change the world and create impact at the same time they're doing good business, that create good value. I don't want to just talk about your first book because you have many others, but I do have another couple of concepts that you talked on your presentation and that I really enjoyed. And one of them was the idea that, companies, we haven't really talked a lot about this in the podcast, so I don't want to go into deeply defining stakeholders or shareholders. Just the idea that companies, should look and should work for all of their stakeholders. And one of the stakeholders actually can be, and that's the idea that you said that I really like, can be actually organizations that could be normally antagonists to what they do, or they could think of them as antagonists. For example, having Coca-Cola work with a company, with an organization like Greenpeace to collaborate instead of being them against each other. I think that's a very interesting point. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Absolutely. To be clear, it doesn't work all of the time.
Okay.
And
yeah,
clearly,
definitely.
any business leader or any business needs to think through, will it have a decent chance of working in the particular circumstances? But you quoted the example which I referred to in my talk, which is a very interesting organisation called Refrigerants Naturally. In my jargon, it's a kind of multi-stakeholder initiative for sustainable development. And it involves Coca-Cola and PepsiCo, which in itself is rather unusual and rather interesting.
Just to have both of the logos in one place, it's
exactly
weird.
But together with Unilever and Red Bull, and then they also involve the United Nations Environment Programme with Greenpeace, because actually they've all recognised that they can learn from each other on improving the sustainability of refrigeration technologies. And actually there was quite a lot of expertise inside Greenpeace on improvements to refrigeration technology, and they were prepared in that particular instance to work with businesses to try and get that more widely applied. Now sometimes the NGO involved doesn't want to engage with business in a kind of close business collaboration. In some cases it may just be that the views of the NGO and of the companies are too far apart for it to work. But my core message around this was that it's sensible, and actually it can be done, is being done in some circumstances, for business to engage much more widely with a much wider range of stakeholders and potential partners than has historically been the case.
I think it's a very interesting point of way of seeing things. Corporate social responsibility should not be one more thing that goes alongside. It should be very holistic and very integrated to the company. And if you truly believe that as a company, then all of these collaborations should make a lot of sense. David, one of the things you've been writing about lately and teaching about lately is one of the key elements for companies to be transformed into these social agents of change, which is the intrapreneur. We talked a little bit, I think, in a couple of episodes about what's an intrapreneur, which it's important to say it's not the same thing as an entrepreneur. Would you care to explain us what is an intrapreneur?
Yes, and we particularly look at social intrapreneurs.
Social entrepreneurs, of course.
And they are men and women inside large organisations who are developing ideas which will benefit the company, will add value to the company, and which at the same time will address social or environmental problems in the wider society. And so very often they are people, at least initially, who are operating under the radar screen in terms of their company management. They're trying out their entrepreneurial idea in their spare time, in their evenings or weekends or during their holiday time. And only after a while do they sort of share the idea with management in a business. So, I mean, some of the people that we've interviewed around the world who we think are social entrepreneurs have talked about moonlighting for their employer. I'm not sure how that translates, but the idea of moonlighting is that you're doing a second job.
Exactly.
Only in this case, you're moonlighting for your
own
employer. Exactly.
I think that's a very interesting concept, and I think it should be more. I mean, events like the ELAC obviously help us spread that concept, because a lot of people that approach us and that read our content and listen to our podcasts, are not entrepreneurs, and they don't have this huge idea that they want to go out and leave their jobs. Some people maybe even can't leave their jobs, and so they get a little bit frustrated that they can't go out and be this social entrepreneur and create social impact. But it's a very cool idea, and it's a very awesome concept actually. That you can know that within the company you're working for, even if you're working for a large company or a corporation or a bank, within that and within your job, you can actually be an entrepreneur and create impact. Actually, I believe that if you are an entrepreneur that can help your company, change its ways and have a more integral point of view about social sustainability and impact, you can actually create huge scalable impact.
You can, and that I think is the difference. And I say this as someone who has been in my time a social entrepreneur. I think if you get it right inside a big company, you can go to scale at a much faster rate and probably in a way that's not possible for most social entrepreneurs. I mean, one of the examples that is a very well-established one now of social entrepreneurism is of something called M-Pesa. M stands for mobile, and Pesa is Swahili for money, so the idea of mobile money. And this is a project that was started by Safaricom, which is the Kenyan subsidiary of Vodafone. And it was started by a social entrepreneur, a guy called Nick Hughes, and he had the vision that you could use the mobile phone network and the mobile phone customer base that Safaricom had to be able to provide some basic financial services to people who don't have access to traditional banking. And that started in a social entrepreneurial way, very much as a pilot. It's now operating in some
it's a huge social company.
10 different countries around the world, including in India and several other African countries apart from Kenya. And the really powerful thing is that at the last count, I think it was something like 1/3 of the Kenyan GDP, or the equivalent of 1/3 of the Kenyan GDP,
wow, that's awesome,
was being transmitted through M-Pesa. Yes. So that's an example of being able to get to a scale that would be very hard for an independent social entrepreneur to do. To be clear, I'm not saying one is better or worse. I'm saying that I think they're different. But the really exciting thing from my perspective now is that a number of companies, and you think of Danone or GSK or Novartis, are now encouraging their employees to explore the option of being a social entrepreneur for their company.
No, I think it's a great idea. M-Pesa obviously is an awesome example, and I think also it should be a wake-up call for a lot of people, because it's a lot of people that always dream of creating impact, but right now are kind of sitting in a very comfortable zone, saying, but I can't leave my job, I can't create impact, I have to have my paycheck. We understand that. However, with this entrepreneur, the concept of an entrepreneur and these examples of people that are changing the world within their companies, it should also let you guys know, if you're working in a company, you have not only the opportunity but also even the responsibility, to be those agents of change within the companies that you're working for.
I think that's absolutely right. And the social entrepreneur is a rather extreme form of that, because you have to be really dedicated and committed, I think, because it takes a lot of extra hard work. It may not work for a whole variety of different reasons, and we met men and women around the world for whom it didn't work, despite them working really hard. But there are, of course, a whole range of different ways in which somebody inside a large company can still make a positive difference and can be a change agent without going to the extent of being a social entrepreneur. I think the social entrepreneur model is a really interesting one, but it's always probably going to be a very tiny proportion of all of the employees. But you can be a champion of sustainability or a champion of a particular aspect of a responsible business agenda, like, say, diversity or inclusion. And of course, you can simply be spotting ideas and taking them to your line managers, to your supervisors and people, and saying, I see this is being done in this other company. Why on earth can't we do this?
Yeah.
I went to ILAC a few days ago. I heard this wonderful example. We should be doing that too. We could do that better.
And it actually can be very good business for the companies, which is, in the end, the final thing that should make a lot of sense to the companies. And I believe, and I think we've talked a lot about this, that you don't have to always aspire to do the biggest change in the world at the first day. It obviously going to take time. I think for both intrapreneurs and entrepreneurs, it works the same way. You're going to fail a lot. You're going to, face a lot of barriers and obstacles. You're going to have to try very different things. But eventually, if you keep at it, if you're passionate about your idea, you could create change. Even if it's a small change within a huge company, that could already mean huge impact. And it's also, I think it's also a very good, I love this conversation because we haven't had the time in Disruptivo to talk about this, but I think it's also a very good moment to say that, we're used to, it's very easy to put the companies like the evil side of society, big corporations create all this huge, terrible impact, The reality is corporations are going to exist all the time. They've always existed. Now they have different forms and shapes, and they're going to keep existing. But the people within them can create impact, and they can, sort of work to change them and turn them. There are a lot of companies that are already doing a lot of good and trying. So sorry, just to give you the word again. It's not enough, and it's. I don't think it's fair, and it's actually irresponsible just to sit back and say, companies are evil. We should be against them. No, try to change them from within. I think that's an awesome path for the entrepreneurs.
I think that's absolutely right. And remember that companies, whether it's a small two-person business or it's a global company with 200,000 or 300,000 employees and a huge big supply chain, whatever the size, companies are made up of people.
Yeah.
And it's people that make the decisions.
Exactly.
Now, clearly there is prevailing cultures inside organizations which can either help or hinder net positive strategies and social entrepreneurism and so on. But people do make the difference. And I thought from when I was about 10 years of age until I was about the age of 35, I thought my way of being an agent of change was to become an elected politician in my own country or in the European Union. But over the years, I realized that, of course, that's an important way of being an agent of positive change, but it's by no means the only way. And I saw, particularly after the end of the Berlin Wall and the fall of communism and the growth of the forces of privatization and liberalization and globalization, the huge power and reach that global companies in particular have, and that done well, people running businesses or taking a part in business can be positive agents of change just as much, if not more, than being an elected politician. And I think what's really crucial is not to think that any one sector has got a monopoly on being able to achieve positive impact.
Yeah.
They all have an important role to play. They all need to step up to the mark, so to speak, in terms of committing more to sustainable development. But what we also need, and something I talked about in my talk at ILAC, is an idea. It's not from me. It's something that came from Professor Joseph Nye at Harvard, and picked up by the global head of McKinsey, the big consulting firm, Dominic Barton. This idea of tri-sector athletes.
Yeah.
In other words, people who are comfortable in all three sectors of business, the public sector, and civil society, and have the capacity to be able to engage and relate to people from those different sectors. And I think really one of the important skills of the future is to be able to be a tri-sector athlete.
That's an awesome idea, because like we've said, it's not enough just to sit back and look to a sector in this case or to government and say they're not doing it right. I'm going to criticize them, it's fine, but you should actually try to work and do something within it. The last point that I do want to talk about is you just launched a book about intrapreneurs, and I created actually a very interesting metaphor with jazz music. So why don't you tell us about your book? I'm going to commit here in video to get some of those books and to give them away for free to our audience.
Fantastic. I think you should challenge your audience. They have to earn this.
No, they'll definitely. I won't make it easy for them.
Good.
But just give me time, guys, to buy them on Amazon or whatever. And when I have them, we'll give them away on the blog. But why don't you tell us about your book, and so we can get people excited about it.
So yes, I mean, here it is: social entrepreneurism and all that jazz. The jazz metaphor is because one of my co-authors is a very talented jazz musician, and in our authors meeting she kept drawing analogies with the jazz world, and at first we kept saying, yes Mel, that's fine, but let's go back to the writing. And eventually we realised actually that she was onto something, because the metaphors flowed so naturally, so we weaved it into the book. Maybe a little bit too much, but anyway, we'll leave that to readers to decide. But what the book tries to do is to tell stories, because I passionately believe that you need to appeal both to heart and head, and you very often can learn better by understanding some individual stories. So we met many social entrepreneurs around the world, so we tell a lot of their stories in the book about the kinds of things that they're doing, like Nick Hughes with Empresas, or like Gib Bullock with Accenture Development Partnerships, or a guy from Tata Consulting who started an initiative called Krishi, which is designed to help Indian rural farmers improve their livelihoods and so on. And then we looked and said, can we sort of say, what are some of the mindsets and behaviours and skills that these social entrepreneurs seem to have? And then we looked from the company perspective. So why on earth should you want to support social entrepreneurs who might be quite disruptive forces inside your company? Some people talk about these people as...
Why do you want to get into trouble?
Exactly, part troublemakers, part tempered radicals. And then we looked at what was the enabling environment. If you were a business, if you were a CEO saying, I need to get more entrepreneurism, more innovation in my business, this is not the only way, but this is one way, because I can appeal to the wider interests and passions, particularly of younger employees. How do we go about doing this? How do we create internal social innovation funds that people can compete for? How do we create mechanisms where you can get some mentoring from some senior people? And also, how might we create opportunities to learn from other social entrepreneurs around the world? And of course, there's now various mechanisms for that. And then we looked and explored, so how might you create a wider ecosystem of support for social entrepreneurs, not just inside a particular business, but across wider society. Okay. So what could business schools do? What could organisations like Ashoka do? I mean, Ashoka's done so much for the idea of social enterprise and social entrepreneurs, and we need to do something similar now across the world for social entrepreneurism.
Excellent. It sounds like an awesome read. Like I said, we'll be giving some of these away in Disruptivo. But if you don't want to wait for them, just go ahead and buy them. It sounds amazing. One key question that I don't know if you've been asked this, but every reporter should do when you talk about this book. What jazz album do you recommend for reading this book?
Oh gosh, that is a really, really good question. And I think I'm going to get Mel, who is the jazz musician co-author, to tell you, because she has a number of different ones that she recommends for different parts of the book.
Excellent. So we'll have to hear from her. David, thank you very much. It's been an awesome conversation. I loved some of the concepts that you talked about. They will probably be coming up in my following articles and books and ideas, so hopefully I'll be able to share them. Thank you very much. Thank you for being Disruptivo. Where can we find you? In social networks? Where can we find the book?
You can find me on Twitter at DoughtyDavidG. I'm sure you can put that.
Don't worry, I'll come up here somewhere. Don't worry about that.
And we have our own website, obviously, which is www.doughtycenter.info.
Excellent. Thank you very much, David. Thank you for being part of the Disruptivo. And thank you, guys. Stay here. We have a lot of things for you.